without further ado, I'm going to hand over to Helen to talk to us about the Jise Student Digital Experience Tracker. Thanks, Helen.
Thanks, Fiona. I hope everyone can hear me okay, and I guess Fiona and Judy will wave frantically at me if you can't. So hi from the UK. We've just had the tail end of a hurricane here actually, and I was explaining to Judy that it's brought some dust over that's made everywhere smell like Australia. So I've been kind of getting a bit of a blast of Australian heat over here the last 24 hours or so. It's great to be here talking to you guys again, and Judy and Fiona wanted me to say a little bit about where the tracker came from, so this is my kind of potted attempt to do that. We ran a project for 3 years in the UK looking at how students were changing their approach to learning, and we did a whole number of background studies and interviews, and there was a huge amount of interest really in what we were finding. But a lot of the universities that wanted to pick up on our findings and materials also said, you know, it's great you guys have done all this talking to students and engaging students in the conversation and bringing them in, but we really want to do that ourselves. We want to go and bring our own students in, because we found that, as you won't be surprised to hear, that digital students are very different from one another and their experience is very different in different institutions. And so we really wanted to encourage this appetite to find out more ourselves. Accepting that most people in situations like I guess you probably are can't run a 3-year research program. You want something kind of quick and engaging, proven. You don't want to waste time on things that may or may not give you the data you want. And ideally you want sort of a little bit of support and guidance as to how to engage students and how to make sure that the data you get from students is then being used as well as it can be to enhance their experience. So this challenge was thrown really at me and another colleague, Tabitha Newman, to come up with some kind of instrument and a guidance process and a collaboration process that would work, that would be easy to administer, credible, and above all would provide institutions with data that was actionable, so that students could really feel that they had bothered to talk and they'd been listened to and heard. So if you could move on for me, Judy. If you could move the slide on, that's cool, thank you. So we ran a couple of pilots in the UK, and where we were coming from really was to give universities an opportunity to get, as I said, to gather the evidence and to have a better conversation with students. But what we found as we started to consult is that there were other things universities wanted to do, and one was to benchmark against comparable universities to find out how they felt they were doing. I don't know exactly the situation in Australia, but I do know that you're under more and more pressure, as we are in the UK, to demonstrate value, to show that what you're doing is leading to a better experience for students and better outcomes. So there was that aspect to it. And also people were really keen to pick up on the expertise that we'd gained in the UK from doing some of these other studies and be part of a community where we would not just go away and squirrel ourselves into our own institutions and do the work, but actually come back and talk to other people who were doing it in networks like this one and say, oh, what did you find and what's it like for you, and where are you up to in your analysis, and you know, how many students did you get involved? And so we've really been trying to learn from each other as well. And a big part of that for me has been going and talking to institutions, of which La Trobe was one, in fact, and Adelaide was another one more recently, and get some case studies and ideas and experiences that we can share more generally in terms of how to do this and how to do it well. So these were the reasons we wanted to do the tracker, and that we set off with this back in 2016. And Judy, if you move the slide on, I can tell you a little bit about the 2 pilots that we've done. So the first pilot was just 24 quite carefully selected institutions, and there's a little kind of infographic on the left of this slide exploring what we did there. Then we went to a much bigger pilot last year, which actually had, last academic year for us, which actually had in the end over 99 separate tracker surveys were run, because some institutions liked it so much they wanted to run more than one, for example with their mainstream HE students and with their online students, for example, because we had 2 slightly separate instruments, but they are similar enough to compare the experiences of HE and online students. So we had these different versions, and we were also really surprised to find the number of international universities that were interested, which was great. And hopefully in the next run we can really pick up on some of that interest and and give you guys, who, if you want to do it, a little bit more back in the way of in-country benchmarking and kind of in-country experience. So we had a lot of attention from in the UK, and I suppose this also was quite a surprise, given that the reason we did it was to give institutions the ability to have better conversations with their students. And yet there was once again enormous interest in those sort of aggregated findings. We hadn't actually, this will probably seem a bit silly, but we hadn't actually put a great deal of thought or resource into what we were going to do with this enormous volume of data once we had it. Frankly, there's about 15 PhDs floating around waiting to be done in there. But we did manage to put together a really good report, and that had a huge amount of interest in the UK, up to government level. The fact that it was so much larger in scale than anything that had been done before, specifically about the digital experience, and the fact that students quite liked being involved with it because the process was engaging, and because we kind of explained to participants that the expectation was students would be engaged, and that was really what happened. So I guess a lot more attention and a lot more national international interest than perhaps we had imagined, but obviously we were very delighted with it, which brings us to the current, I'll say a little bit more about the findings. Judy, if you could go on quickly to the next slide. And I'm really happy to come back and say more about this, because in a sense this is where my brain has been immersed for quite a lot of the last kind of 6 months, and summarising these findings on one slide would be very difficult. But I think the headline summary, as with previous studies, is that students are very different, and what they want from their digital experience is very unique to them, and organisations can do a huge amount to make that experience more positive, to meet students' individual needs better. But really there is this enormous variety in the access and skills that students bring to their experience, and in a sense what they take away from it as well. So the sorts of things we were able to pull out of the findings were kind of headline messages about students' digital access and ownership, their existing skills and habits and practices of learning, and how they feel about technology, which is where in a sense you see the greatest variety, from their preference for group work or independent study to the students who say, really, I'm very worried about all this technology replacing my teachers, to the ones who say, just give me more technology, and for goodness sake, don't take any of these digital services away because I'm completely dependent on them, and all points in between. Students had some great things to say to other students about how to do this well, and some great recommendations to make back to their institution. And I know a lot of places are making a lot of use of that and looking at that qualitative data as well as the quantitative data that allowed them to sort of benchmark where they were up to. So those are the kind of findings that we have, and I'm really happy to explore anything you want to ask me in a bit more detail in a moment. But if we could move on to thinking about this year's study, as well as looking at the actual findings, the greater part of my work was looking at how people actually found the process. So looking at those 97 trackers that were run, those 83 institutions that took part, what was that like? And the focus here very much was on the UK, but hopefully in the coming year we'll also learn a bit more about the international experience too. One of the things we found, with great thanks to support from colleagues in RMIT who helped with this analysis for us, we found that the survey is essentially a really robust instrument, which was great news to us. The things we thought belonged together do seem to belong together. The questions are answerable and for the most part valid, and we've refined in a few areas where we found we could ask less and get just as much data, because we don't want to waste your time or students asking things that essentially tell us the same thing over again. The process of going through it from an institutional level was valued, and you'll understand that at this point in time, we have only quite limited data about the longer term impact of doing something like the tracker, but we have lots of data about the short term impact of the process itself, that it brought people together, that students were genuinely, for the most part, were genuinely engaged, not just as people ticking boxes, but actually as co-researchers, as the people who designed the publicity around the survey, who wanted to get involved in thinking about the findings. So there was a kind of genuine engagement there, and that is very much due to the conversations we were able to have with the people running it and the experiences we were able to share. Lots of people found that having these students, this student voice in a sense in their back pocket to bring out has been really useful in talking about change, in thinking about cases for investment, in thinking about, for example, benchmarking some new initiative you might have underway. It's really useful to be able to say, well, here's what students are saying about their experience now. Here are some strengths and weaknesses we've identified. Let's see if in a year or 2 years' time, a lot of people seem to feel that 2 years is kind of the right cycle to do something like this, but some people are going back every year because they're engaged in a real change process and they want to benchmark and monitor that change on a more fine-tuned basis. We can go back and see, have we addressed some of those weaknesses? Have we amplified some of the strengths? What are students saying now that they weren't saying a year ago, for example? That opportunity to talk to people in the same situation in other institutions was really valued, and hopefully we're going to do that again with more in-country networking as well. And I guess now, Fiona and Judy will talk to you about ease of use from their perspective. I know that administering a large-scale survey is never going to be a kind of complete walk in the park. We have done everything we can to make that as straightforward as we can, while giving you, if you decide to do this, giving participating organisations some leeway. So we don't just say, here's the survey, send out the URL, all your students will do it. We actually say, you might want to change and customise this survey to meet your needs better. You might want to think and plan about how you're going to engage your students. So we don't make it literally, here's a URL, send it out. There is a more involved process than that, and that's because we heard that organisations, universities wanted this to be customised to the way you want to do things and to the ways you relate to your students, and especially to the issues you want to ask them about. So when I say comparative ease of use, I want to offset complete ease of use with the ability to customise, to reflect for yourself what matters to you, and to engage students in the way that you want to. We've found these aggregate findings are having a really high impact, as I said, up to the level of government, and because there has not been previously quite such a large-scale or robust piece of research into how students experience their digital curriculum and the digital environment for study, which is the two key things that this tracker asks about. So, the opportunity is there to have an impact, both locally and I would say nationally, if you want to take it up. So, thinking just ahead a little bit about, Judy, if you could move the slide on for me, and if I could take a slurp of tea. Big UK tea mug. We've done a little bit of work on the question set, making it really continuous for people who've done it before and want to see the change, but also making sure that the instrument is as robust as possible. We continue to feel that we are really, we're not exactly in an early pilot. This is a very robust instrument, but we continue to want to get feedback. It's not yet a full service, and that is very much in your interest, as I'll come on to in a minute, because if it was a full service, I think it would be harder for me to go to Jise and say, make this free, put it out as widely as possible, welcome everyone who comes, we've got lessons to learn, we want to learn from the international experience too. And at the moment, that is the door is open, we want everyone to get involved who can, and there's no cost, there's no hidden cost, you just kind of do the survey and we give you as much support as we're able to. But that does mean we're kind of asking you for some input and some reflection on how it's gone and how it could be better. So we've upgraded to some extent to a small extent the questions were asked, and I can say a little bit more about that. But if you haven't engaged with the previous questions, that might be a little bit less meaningful to you. But I think we've got a very robust question set in these areas. You can see speaking to students about you and your digital habits, your digital access, then talking to them about your course and your institution. So those are those two key areas, your digital curriculum, the learning and teaching you get, and the kind of background environment that supports that. The two things we think are experienced by students very much together, although probably your institution, very different people are responsible for them, but we kind of want to bring them together to speak to students about how they're impacted by issues like Wi-Fi or issues like the quality of the software they get to use. They all have an impact on their experience of the curriculum. And then we kind of ask students in a little bit more of a personal way their feelings about how technology is being used, how they respond to it, what they'd like, what they don't like, those kind of things. Now this year, going back to my observation that we really didn't put enough resource into the analysis, we say to everybody who does the survey, put lots of resource into analysing your findings, and then we didn't quite have the right resource ourselves. We did a reasonable job, but this year we're putting a lot more into making sure that's a much more collaborative process. So we have a whole series of review panels we're pulling together. So at the end of April 2018, we'll have a whole load of data, and we'll be asking students and staff and people who've actually run the tracker, as well as researchers and experts and so on, to look at that data, to draw conclusions, to really make sense of it, to see where the gaps are, to see where the surprises are. My God, why did that happen? Can we make better sense of that? Again, hopefully we can do a little bit of that within benchmarking groups. So if there's a very large Australian contingent, then there's every reason to make a case to say, well, actually, Australian academics, experts, librarians, e-learning people need to sit down and have some sort of say in what that data means. It's no good us just handing it back to you. You know, there might need to be a review process. We've got a few technical changes that make it a little bit more customizable as to how you use the survey at your end. It's still really simple if you just want one URL and you publicize that URL and everybody gets to see it and use it. If you're familiar with using the system that we use, you could send out individualized links to learners if that's something you habitually do with your surveys. Just makes it easier to track and chase and follow up, but not compromising on the data security and anonymity, hopefully. We've upgraded all our guidance, and I'm just in the process of doing some international guidance, which will just explore the ways in which we can support international universities particularly. And I'm going to propose, in addition to this webinar, which I know Judy and Fiona have put on for your particular needs, there will be a webinar uniquely for international universities as well. So I can say a bit more about that support, but at the moment I'm really just, I guess, trying to encourage you to think this might be something worth doing, and it might be worth getting some support to do from people like Judy and Fiona who've been down the road before. So I think I'm just got a couple more slides to go. Judy, if you could move on. And oh no, that's me done. Okay, surprise, that's me done. So we've rehearsed this extensively, as you can tell. So before I hand over to Judy and Fiona, I will be around for the whole webinar. You can come back with questions to all of us, but if there's any questions particularly to me about the UK background, about the development of the webinar, of the tracker, and about where we're going with it this year, I'm going to look in the chats window and just pick up on anything people want to put there. Or Judy, if you have other ways of feeding questions to me from Twitter, for example, then you go right ahead and do that.
Okay, thanks Helen for that really great introduction. Just to say, Helen, at the end of this series of slides, there is some more detail about the tracker, so we can talk a little bit more about that. So just moving along to, okay. So here at the University of Adelaide, one of the main reasons we got involved with this tracker this year was that we were developing a digital capabilities framework for our students. And with Helen helping us along the way, it just seemed a fantastic opportunity to actually survey our students and ask them what they thought. There was potentially we could have had run also a survey of staff, but at the same time as this framework was being developed, we were running a new learning management system into Canvas, so the staff were well and truly in another direction. But the students, as you can see from the numbers here on the screen, we had an incredible response. Sort of we had over 1,500 students responded. So it may have been the weekly prizes, I'm not sure, but by far the most successful way of engaging with our students was an all-student email. And I was watching the responses come in for that 24 hours and they were just piling in. So, so we got over 900 in that short space of time. And this year we ran it in March, which was second week of semester, which wasn't ideal. However, saying that, because we ran it through all of our student cohort, we're only sort of talking about first years perhaps who may have had too many emails coming in. However, our response rate was really high. So we had 70% were undergraduates, and and 28% were first years, 17% were second years, and 26% were third years. Postgraduate was really high level of responses as well. They really engaged with it. But each faculty, oddly enough, had almost equal percentages of respondents. So I think the health sciences faculty was slightly higher. So here you see on the screen some of the ways we advertise it. We have Tim here in the corner receiving the first weekly prize in front of a digital screen. And in our central hub area, we had screens going all the time, encouraging students to be part of this. And it was part of that orientation fun time. So in some respects, I think it was all tied up together and it worked quite well. So yeah, so we sent it to all of our students, and that was probably why we got the response we did. I think the University of Adelaide has something like 25,000 students. So, you know, you may not think it's terribly much, but in reality, it was a good response. So here is an example of what we've done so far. We had a Festival of Learning and Teaching where the framework was launched, and what we also did was put up a poster on just some of those first findings from the survey, and perhaps these sorts of things you might expect. However, it's nice to see that they're you know, similar to the UK. So I'll just pick out three here because of the ones here on the screen. So what we found, perhaps not unsurprisingly, but the access is definitely mobile, and you know, 87% use laptops, 83% use smartphones. So they're, and very, very few now are just using desktop computers. The support, I think, was actually quite interesting for us in the library to realise how much students actually turn to other places apart from university staff and professional staff to have questions answered about their digital skills. You know, this would include sort of general library skills that we normally get. So yeah, they really do turn to informal support. 43% said they go first to online, you know, YouTube clips and things like that, and 20% ask their friends for help, and fellow students about, you know, sort of 16%. So really, that's quite an interesting perspective for us to find out. And the other one on the top right-hand corner, the skills, I'll just talk a bit about that. That, I think, really mirrored what other places have found, which is that almost, well, 80%, over 80% said that digital skills are really important, but they didn't feel necessarily they were getting it into their course. Places like health sciences and engineering said, yeah, a bit higher than that, but on the whole, they really valued the opportunity to develop their skills. So just briefly going on, just have a little look at some of the things that were different to the UK. The digital support, students preferred the online information. I say that was really quite high here at Adelaide, not so high in the UK. So we've got 43% here, UK was 36%. Also asking our lecturers was quite a bit lower. So students don't run to their lecturers here and tutors and so forth to ask for support. The polling devices were really strongly used here, and they are a feature of our courses in Canvas. So they were very, very well used by students. So 39% said they use them at least once a week, but in the UK it was 15%. So, however, quite significantly, I think, a lot of students said that when they're answering questions about being distracted, less likely to attend class, isolated, it was much higher than the UK. Probably unsurprisingly, final year students said they didn't attend class if there was digital alternatives. So you know, that's really quite significant, from 32% here who said they were more isolated, and the UK it was 16. So that's just a few findings that we have. So I'll now move to you, Fiona.
Thanks, Judy. So like Judy, at La Trobe, we developed a digital literacies framework, and we also had Helen involved in that framework development, which was really fantastic. So for us, implementing the tracker was part of implementing our digital literacies framework. So we piloted the tracker, and we had 192 students responded. So it's quite a lot smaller than the Adelaide response, but we did it a little bit differently. We targeted 6 subjects, and they were all first-year subjects, but we did get responses from a range of subjects, so health sciences, science, business, law, humanities and education, and also responses across all our campuses. So that's something that we recognise that it's a limited sample, but when you have a limited sample like that, that's where it makes it really good to be able to benchmark and compare with other institutions. So just if you just go to the next slide, Judy. The other thing about our pilot was it was in March, so we had to finish by the end of March, and so we piloted it, I think, in the 2nd and 3rd week of March. And so our results are quite interesting when you think that these are what first-year students at La Trobe are saying, so students very new to university. And these are the sort of things that the idea that we've got of their digital experience. So 68% feel using digital tools helps them fit learning into their life, and they're also accessing learning on the move. The other thing about this was they also are using these tools a lot in their private study. So they're 60% are using digital tools to make notes. Over 80% are using digital tools to listen and watch learning materials, and they're also using it to organise their study time. So lots of use of digital tools. The other thing that we were really delighted that in the results was over 90% have access to reliable Wi-Fi. So that's a good result for us because it's saying that we have an international standard Wi-Fi on campus. The other thing I want to point out in this sort of general picture of the LTU student digital experience is the skills. Only 50% of students felt their course prepares them for the digital workplace. So this was a real surprise to us when you think about how many of the students are using those digital tools in all aspects of their private study, but also their coursework as well. To have only 50% feel that they're prepared for the digital workplace when we know 90%, more than 90% of jobs need digital capabilities is something we really need to think about. It might be because they're in first year, but and this is where it's really interesting where you've got international institutions to compare with, because that 50% was fairly consistent in the UK, but also in the conversations that Judy and I have had, Adelaide had that result as well. So it's quite interesting because when we were developing our digital literacies framework, one of the things we wanted to do when we were developing the framework was imagine what a digital student looks like. And so the tracker has really given us the data to fill in that picture with evidence so that we can really see what the student digital experience is. You just want to go to the next slide, Judy. One of the things that we have loved about doing the tracker is the way that you can compare your results with internationally, with international institutions. And so this throws up some more differences and surprises that you can sort of think about a little bit more. So one of the surprises for us was students aren't going to online information as much for digital support as other institutions. but they are going more to student support services. So that's just something maybe again about first year, but something about that was different from La Trobe. The other thing that was really different about La Trobe is the use of quizzes. So nearly 60% of La Trobe students in those first 3 weeks had been using quizzes in their course, and that was quite different from the UK learners. And even though feedback from the students at La Trobe talked about how much they like using quizzes, how much they enjoy the online learning activities, they also feel really distracted and isolated when digital learning activities are part of their course. So that's another thing that we really need to think about. And that was similar with Adelaide as well. So I'll just go to the next slide, Judy. I think that's really was all I wanted to say about the La Trobe data at this stage. We're still working on a report. I can highly recommend being involved in the Jise Tracker. It's just been fantastic to be part of that community of other people investigating this, and it really gives you a lot of evidence and a lot of data to talk about digital literacies or digital capabilities in your institutions across the library, but also across all the other areas of the university that the library works with. So I'll just hand back to you, Helen, because you might want to talk a little bit more about signing up by the end of October.
Oh, thank you, Fiona. Yeah, I could do that, but I just wanted to pick up actually on a couple of things that, listening to you two talking, I just wanted to kind of come back in, if that's okay. So, I mean, the first thing I wanted to say was just how amazing a job Adelaide did with student engagement, and we have actually been using Adelaide as an example to people in the UK for how to do this well. And that's not to say that La Trobe got a poor response, because as Fiona said, they actually did it quite differently at La Trobe. And that's, that's a sign that actually the research instrument that is the tracker that underlies it could be used in a whole variety of ways. We had people using it for very specific research-focused uses, as well as polling across the whole student body. So it's quite flexible. You don't have to imagine that if you're not getting kind of 1,500 responses, you're failing. You can use it to target specific groups of students or specific questions. The other thing is that, it's fantastic to see Judy and Fiona using the UK mean to benchmark themselves. But of course, it'd be so much better if they were using an Australian mean or an Australia plus New Zealand, or however you kind of want to characterise the kind of national group that you're in. And unfortunately, we couldn't do that because we just didn't have enough institutions, which meant that there was a danger that institutions would be able to recognise each other's data, and we take data security really, really seriously. So with a very small number of institutions, there is the risk that any one institution might be able to go into the aggregated benchmark data and sort of knowing which 2 or 3 other universities are involved, maybe draw some conclusions that wouldn't be desirable to be public. So if we have more institutions signed up, then we can create a benchmarking group, let's say of Australian universities. It's entirely possible to do that. So I just thought I'd make that little plug really for more people to sign up. And I think the other thing to say is that we do, I, as a researcher, I was very keen that we give students the opportunity to explore negative aspects of their digital experience. Every time we ask them, does learning with digital technologies make you feel more independent? Does it make you more able to fit learning into your life? We also said, is there a risk it makes you feel more isolated from your tutors, for example? Now, the detail really brings that out, but actually the big picture is one of students feeling really positive about their online learning, and I think it's kind of important to say that as well, because overall the picture is of students relying on their online learning, expecting staff to be good at it, appreciating it when it's done well, and being ready for more change. So I think these issues of potential distraction, isolation, and lack of motivation are usually for a minority of students. I think it is interesting to explore those differences, and whether Australian students overall are more willing to say they have a negative experience, or if there are kind of real underlying issues there. But overall, the experience has, for most students, does seem to be more positive than negative by quite a long way. So just those reactions to what both of you said, and just a huge thank you to Judy and Fiona for being pioneers, really, and really thinking this could be something that was done internationally, because that, in a sense, was challenging us to think that at the time, and we're really grateful to you for making this such a great project over here. So if you're interested for this year, we just to do some practical things, we're asking people to sign up by the end of October. I can say exclusively here that we will probably end up pushing that out because we've had so much interest, we're going to have to. But at the moment, we're saying please try and sign up by the end of October. That doesn't mean you have to do anything until you're ready to do it, because the benchmarking groups actually close at the end of April 2018. So you can run the survey anytime between now and then and get your own data. And at the end of April 2018, we'll create a cut-off point, which just allows us to aggregate data across the benchmarking groups. And that's the only reason really for that cut-off point, so that we can say, here's your data from Australia, for example, so that each individual institution can then check their kind of norm reference against the norm for their benchmarking group on all of the quantitative questions. So we've already got 18 international universities through the first phase of sign-up, and it looks like being quite a lot more, because some of those want to be sort of in-country facilitators for a whole group of universities, which is exciting. Places like Brazil and parts of Africa involved, which is interesting, and North America for the first time coming in, and what the North American institutions, who of course have access to a number of international surveys that originate in North America, some of which you may well know, like the ECAR surveys, they're kind of coming to us and saying, well, what we really like is the student engagement, the fact that students are involved in this, and we're starting to get a lot of students not happy to do surveys, so we really need a new process that brings students along with us. So that's why we're getting interest, I think, from North America for the first time. This year, the participation and the license is completely free, and all the support that goes with that, and the benchmarking if we have enough institutions to do that. And in addition, there's going to be some one-off support for international universities. If we get a big benchmarking group, obviously we can tailor that support a little bit, and it's likely to be me, I'm afraid, because who's doing most of the international stuff this year again. So if some of you want to email me personally about it, I'm really happy to have one-to-one discussions about it. If you've got any particular issues or stumbling blocks in your university, if you think you might be interested but this year's not right for you, we can talk about the future. It's just that JISC will not guarantee that this is going to be open to all beyond this run ending in April 2018. So Judy, could you move me on to the last slide, please, which is just about sign up, I think, and then we can see if there's any more questions and contributions, or maybe that is the last slide. Oh, okay, so that's just contact details, but maybe worth just looking in the chat. So I don't know at the moment what interest there is from core libraries and Australian libraries. I'm afraid we could maybe take a poll of people here to see if there is interest from universities that haven't done it before, or what your issues might be in terms of getting buy-in and sign up from your university if you needed to. I'll hand back to Judy and Fiona now to kind of field any thoughts.
I think it would be quite, in Australia, I think it would be quite good if a group of core libraries did the tracker, because it has been really useful benchmarking against the UK data, but it would be better benchmarking against Australian universities. And yeah, some of those comments that you made could be really useful to talk about within call. And the other thing that I think would be really useful if more Australian institutions did this would be the analysis support, because the analysis is quite time consuming. So the more institutions we have, the more analysis support we can get, which means it'll be less time consuming for each individual institution.
Yeah, I agree, Fiona. The analysis of the qualitative data is fascinating, but we got over 1,000 responses per question. So it's been, been quite challenging to go through them all. But it is really worth doing. But yeah, the analysis is taking more time than.
Yeah, that's right.
Yeah, I agree with you about the all of the benchmarking ideas as well.
But I think too, Judy, it shows how engaged students were with the tracker.
Absolutely, yeah.
We only had 192 students, but we had a lot more qualitative comments than that. So they were really engaged.
And they're very respectful, and they had some fantastic ideas that can really move forward.
Yeah, absolutely.
There's also a question here that Helen's replying to on chat, but just for both of you, for La Trobe and University of Adelaide, what was the time and effort investment needed to administer the tracker?
I think what I would say about it was really easy. Like Helen was right. The BOSS system is set up so that once you're registered for the tracker, you just go in and your tracker is ready, pretty much ready to go. If you're interested in customising the questions, so for example, we had a customised question that asked students about their ideas about blended learning, and that customising that question took a bit of time because I worked with learning and teaching staff to sort of come up with a question. But if you're just going to run it without customising any questions, it's really very straightforward. You just need to generate the link and then send that link to the groups of students that are going to do it.
Yeah, I agree. We also did a customised question about how they access digital skill training and so forth. So that was our one. We were able to customise one question, but also and then just arrange it by faculty and year of study. So there was 3 questions. But I agree with you. It was incredibly straightforward. The advertising marketing through the digital screens was a lot of fun, and it didn't engage the library in the process. It was great for the library to actually lead that, even though the project was a university project. So it's not terribly time consuming to set up that. Yeah, I wouldn't say it's, and also because everything's there, you don't have to sort of test the questions and so forth. You know, they've already been tested.
Yeah, exactly.
Is there any other?
There's no other questions. Only one other question that was asked initially about will the slides be made available?
Yes, they will.
Yeah.
Yep.
Absolutely.
The other thing is about when you actually run it. So it's like the time difference between the UK academic year and the Australian academic year was a little bit of an issue for us because it's such a small window to run it if you want to run it at the start of the year. But that will actually change a little bit.
I agree, yeah.
Because it's going to be open for longer.
Yeah.
And the other thing for us too at La Trobe, we're going to try and get a larger cohort, but more in terms of students across different year levels, because really we got a snapshot of what first years think, which is really valuable. But what we want to be able to do is say, well, how does that experience and perception change over the course of a few years, and that will be really important.
Yeah, I mean, that's what we're looking forward to run it again, even though it's only a year. Within that year, we can track through the students year by year, because we actually did every year level, including this.
I think it would be quite...
Sorry, go.
Yeah, I was going to say, I think it would be quite reasonable to run it every year if you had support for analysis, because we are still trying to finish our full report. I mean, Helen was right when she said the richness of the data is just amazing, and there's so many different aspects that you could go into enormous detail and analysis with, and it feels like we're hardly finished our report for this year, and already we're starting to think about how are we going to communicate to students for the next tracker. So, yes. Or
I think
2 years. Yeah.
If I can jump in, I mean, I think it's very easy for us to, dealing with the data and are close to it, to kind of worry and fret that we're not doing justice to the richness of what students are saying. But I think just those two infographics that you both put up, particularly Judy, I don't know if you can go back to the one from Adelaide, but I think, you know, the power of that infographic with just the very simple messages, one really kind of relevant quote from that, yeah, you know, that, I mean, I think we'd all really like to be able to produce something like that and put it in front of our students and say, you know, we're actually telling you something about yourselves and where you're up to. We're responding to it. We're listening. And you can get something like that out really quickly from the data. I think you'd both agree. So, you know, I think the other thing I'd say is that it's a really great opportunity to run this as people based in particularly in the library. So what we found with the first round, when we just had 24 institutions, is we did actually have interest from nearly 60 institutions, but with the 24 that eventually we selected, we did have to sort of beat a few people around the head a little bit to get them to take it seriously. With the second round, we had people just pouring in wanting to do it. With this round, we've got people at the institutions that are running it competing with each other to be the lead contact for the tracker, because they've realised that it's very influential in their institution, and being the person who has the data is actually really powerful. So we're having to adjudicate between different competing claims to be the person to run the tracker this year at some institutions. Now, I'm not suggesting that that you're all kind of that convinced about it yet, but I do think there's something really powerful in, you know, what this network seems to be doing really effectively in Australia is asserting that these are issues that the library has a lot to say about and can contribute to. And I think having your hands on this kind of data gives you a really powerful claim to have those arguments in your institution. So, you know, that is worth considering.
Yeah, I agree. We're going to be running it with the learning technology learning designers this next round, because they get a lot of feedback about their learning management system, some slightly negative comments about digital capabilities of staff. But this survey brought out the fact that students really value face-to-face teaching and not to let it go. So I think there are slightly negative perhaps messages, but there's also some really positive ones for academics to really feel that they are valued in the classroom. We got lots of comments saying how excited they were to use particular tools, and how do not take away that passionate involvement face to face. So I think the students are incredibly aware that technology is important, but they're also incredibly aware that they come to university for a face-to-face, you know, with other students, and how important that is. So I think that wouldn't have come out in any other sort of survey that we've done before.
Yeah, I really agree, Judy, and it gives you the data to have the conversations about, you know, where in the university that face-to-face support and service can happen. And one of the obvious places is in the library, you know, but also to be able to bring in those other service providers as well. So, which is really connecting it up for students, I suppose. Yeah,
but little things like they prefer little short videos rather than great big long PDFs about a database or something. You know, so little things like that are really useful, you know, and just that they came back from the qualitative feedback.
Yeah.
I would just emphasise the quality. Yeah, the qualitative feedback is where you get the nuance that can explain some of the other findings, isn't it? So, you know, the students, I mean, the overwhelming qualitative feedback about valuing face-to-face experiences with peers and with academic staff, and the things that students really, really like are often things that enhance that experience. So things like live quizzes and, you know, live polling experiences and little live missions on the internet. You know, those are things that students come back and saying, yes, they really like those things, and they make it more interesting and motivating. And you've got fantastic kind of data there to support staff to feel confident in their digital practice, to feel that they're bringing something in. But I also do think it is quite interesting to see how much more likely Australian students seemed to be to go to support services, including the library, than their UK counterparts. So it's very interesting, which we could maybe you know, there might be a bit of meta-analysis that would really say, look, in Australia, students do have this habit of going, they're much more likely to see support services as valuable in this space. So let's not lose that. Let's make that a real strength. And it would be lovely to have that as coming out as a headline message, because it does look to me as though that is a significant difference. Students in the UK overwhelmingly look online or ask their friends. They don't often know who to turn to help them beyond the immediate contacts they have in their course. And clearly in Australia, something slightly different is happening.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, no, I think that was a big standout surprise for us as well, and that we need to get that message out to the university, that we need to continue to provide that and support it, because it is the safety net. You know, if you're not getting the support or the connection you need in your online learning activities or in your course, there is that safety net where you can connect to people.
And I think the the feedback about being mobile is really important for libraries, because a lot of our material that isn't necessarily mobile orientated, and the fact is that they are using their mobiles for everything is really important for us to take note of, I think. I mean, we see them all with iPads and mobile phones and so forth, but really a lot of students that's all they use. So, I think that was fantastic to get that note of.
Yes, and it's useful for thinking about access and inclusion issues to really see how dependent students are on particular kinds of devices. I mean, the other thing I would say that came out really strongly from the UK was that students, the level of device ownership was incredibly high, and particularly in universities, I think on average students were using about 2.3 devices to access their learning. But the level of reliance on university provision was also incredibly high as well, in terms of desktops and printers. So it's not the case that everyone's got an iPad and so that's just fine. It's actually the case that students are developing quite complex practices around integrating their own devices with institutional devices and using institutional fixed computing as kind of almost in a social way, as places to meet, to do their work together. Also, you know, students have these devices, but what quality are they? Has everyone got a smartphone that will actually do the things they want it to? Has everyone got a laptop that's not got a broken screen? So there's another really powerful message about the importance of for access to education and for equity to continue to provide some of those resources.
Yeah. Another interesting thing that we found too was that students didn't necessarily know what to expect in terms of digital learning when they started their course. And I thought that was quite interesting, because it makes, like, we just assume, like, we know that they're using all those things in their private study and obviously their life as well, but still somehow the translation or the transfer in their thinking isn't happening, because they think that they don't know, or they didn't know what to do. So that's something for us to think about, how we communicate that, or maybe connect with secondary schools. Yeah, I don't know. You're on mute, Helen.
Thank you. There's a new question this year, Fiona, which specifically asks about preparedness to study with the technologies you use, because we did pick up that there was a lot of a lack of preparedness on the part of students, and perhaps there's more that colleges and universities can do about it. And also in the UK, in Wales, which the Welsh Government is actually now using the tracker, has decided to use the tracker across a whole swathe of end-of-year schools and colleges to track the experience across and to take a governmental approach to how students are being prepared digitally. So that's really exciting to see that happening at a kind of formal government level.
Yeah, no, that's fantastic. It's really good. Judy, did you want to add anything else before we finish up?
Right. Yeah, I'd really encourage other universities to get involved. It doesn't actually take a huge amount of staff time. It's a great exercise. It's working with other departments around the university. and it really gives us more data than we get through other surveys. Once again, you need to watch out that students aren't getting surveyed and then we're not responding. I think that's the thing that you have to be careful, that you need to really respond to what they're saying and at least give them an idea that some of their, strong, what the findings that came through from a lot of people, you really need to act on to some degree. And some have been acted on, because at Adelaide we had a new learning management system, and a lot of the things they were talking about have been fixed. But you do need to feed back to students and keep that going. I think that's really important. But I do think it's a fantastic survey to be part of, and I hope other people do join in this year.
Yep, and I totally endorse that and agree. I really would encourage everybody to get involved, or think about it and think about getting involved, and definitely contact Helen if you're interested. We would love it if more Australian institutions were involved. Is there anything you just want to say before we close, Helen?
Just to say that I've sent you guys a number of links which I didn't have time to paste into the chat window, but they include the link for signing up, or you can use my email address if you want to know more. There's lots more information online, so if you want to circulate those links, that would be great, and people can then decide for themselves. And also, I know that you're going to share the slides, so people will have a chance to go back through this and review it.
Yes. So I'd just like to say thank you so much to Helen. That was just fantastic to hear about the tracker. And thank you also to Judy and to Michael. And we will certainly be thinking about how we're going to try and increase our student numbers using some of your techniques, Judy, when we run the tracker again. So thank you, everybody. As Helen said, we will make those links available, and we'll also make the slides available. We'll put them up on the blog, and we'll also circulate them via the email list. Did you want to say anything, Michael, before we go?
No, I think you've covered everything that people have asked. So, yep, no, that.
Yep, great. Okay, thanks, everybody.
Okay, thank you.